Okay, so today we're going to be looking at economic systems, and we're going to be breaking down different types of economic systems, starting with, in this video, the free market and how it works. First, we kind of look at what are the characteristics to kind of overview what we're going to be discussing. First of all, you have certain characteristics that define a free market. You have, of course, households and firms. And of course, my beautiful lining skills are again making an appearance. Basically, we're going to define what factor and product markets are. So we're going to define what markets. Well, that's interesting. I'm going to erase that. So just as kind of to overview what we're going to be discussing and what we're going to be defining, we're going to be looking at specifically the characteristic, like what separates a free market from other types of economies. So we're going to define households and firms. We're going to be defining what a factor and product markets are and how they differ and kind of how they fit in the scheme. We're going to be looking at the role of self-interest and competition and how it appears in free markets that really set it apart. And of course, looking at some economic goals that really are important and priority within free market systems. So first of all, the purpose of markets. The idea that markets exist specifically comes from the fact that you have somewhere that you can have a way to obtain the things that you need. And that is because you have this idea that not one person is self-sufficient. You yourself in the market are going because you have something you cannot provide yourself, but you need a way to obtain it. So it allows for this exchange of goods to occur so that we can get the things we can. Like for instance, we've learned that Ms. Mason cannot grow plants. So having food and vegetables and those things, it's not possible for me. So I need a place to get it because I'm not self-sufficient. So in a free market, in order to kind of create a market itself, you have specialization. My specialty is not fruits and vegetables. So because we're not self-sufficient, we're going to where somebody is. So each of the products and goods that we need someone who can do it. So you need, of course, the natural resources and factors of production. You need someone who has access to the natural resources to make or create what you're looking for. And you need, of course, someone who's focused on it, become really good at it, to create it in a way that makes it useful to you. So because that, you need to have a market where this exchange can occur. So whenever we refer to a market specifically, we're looking at a mode of exchange. So in today's society, we have so many different markets. We have your actual physical markets where, you go to the actual store to purchase something. Or we also have now online markets where we have an internet market, an internet mode of exchange for goods and service to happen electronically. So wherever you sell or buy a product or a service, you are participating in the market. So in a free market economy, you have some three key economic questions. Remember, they are what, how, and for whom. And in a free market, it's all about how do we answer these questions? So we have all of these choices made by individuals. For instance, a producer. So you have producers that are defined as someone who makes and provides a good and service. And then you have consumers, someone who consumes it, partakes of it, buys it. So the choices are all up to these individuals and how they're going to answer the questions. So producers are going to decide the what, they're going to see a need, decide that they want to produce it, put all the factors of production together, and then get it to the marketplace for the consumers. And consumers have a choice of what they're going to do. So they really have a choice in the for whom. If they don't want your service, they don't got to take it. But if they want it, they will partake. So that's really how these questions are being answered, and in no other way. So in a free market system, you have individuals who are privately making their decisions, you have privately owned business, and businesses own their own factors of production to put it together to make their good and service. So this is what we call a circular flow model. And this is really important to see because it shows how all of this interacts. So you have the two markets here. You have a product market, which is going to be your goods. And then you have your factor market, which is going to be what goes into making the goods. So this is basically your land, labor, and your capital in that exchange. So as you can see, you have households, which is basically consumers. And you have firms, which are your producers. So the first thing is you have the households, which when we talk about the physical flow going to firms in this factor market, households are people. You are going to have, of course, labor is a big part of it, but you also have the exchange of producers going to obtain these factors of production. They might buy land in order to grow. They're going to have maybe go to a specific grower and purchase, wood or, iron or ore, basically to obtain what they need to do to produce. And then they're going to provide those goods back into the market once they're finished for purchase. So you have the monetary flow in exchange. So when you have the physical factors of production being exchanged, you of course have to give money. And so firms will pay households for their labor, factors of production. In return, when you have the final goods and services produced, of course, then the households are going to purchase those goods and services. So it's kind of like, they call it a circular because it is going in a circular motion. You have this never-ending cycle of providing and paying for an exchange of goods or services or factors of production. And if you notice, it's really only two players. You have your households and you have your firms. So these are the only two players within a free market. They're making the decisions, they're making the exchanges, and there's very little interference between the two of them. So you have, anytime you have a market, again, to review, is an arena of exchange, whether that is in factors of production, in the factor market, or whether that's going to be within the actual goods and services and final things that are being sold within the product market. Both markets are free of exchange. So free markets really are defined by their pattern of self-regulation. So Wealth of Nations is a book that was written in the 1700s by a man named Adam Smith, who later basically becomes known as the father of economics. And Adam Smith basically says that within a market, it operates the best when everything is driven by self-interest. So a firm wants to make money, so they're going to provide goods and services that the households actually want and need. And they're going to provide it at a price that they can actually purchase it at because they want to make money. If they don't sell it at the right price, nobody's going to buy it. So self-interest is what really drives that motivation and force of a free exchange in a market. And a household is driven by being able to obtain the things that they need but cannot provide themselves. And they're going to fulfill that. So this self-interest really is what drives the market. And he thinks that, and he kind of expounds upon this idea that this is all you need. People fulfilling their own self-interest to make the market run. You're going to keep prices down because producers want to sell it. And then you're going to keep prices down because really at the end, you would rather pay less for something than pay more for the same thing. So self-interest is going to drive it to regulate itself. You don't need any other kind of intervention with self-interest involved. So it's a positive incentive, self-interest, that will cause your players to respond in the market to keep lower prices, to keep more goods flowing, and to keep spending less money. So when the opportunity cost is low for individuals in the market, they're really fulfilling that self-interest and they're being able to fulfill their needs. So just letting this, and that's where the hands-off kind of theory comes, leave it alone, less self-interest and incentive guide, and there's nothing else that really needs to partake within a free market. So positive incentives, but also negative incentives can play a role. And you see this in your own life. You see positive things that drive you forward, wanting to get in colleges, getting good grades, having rewards for your things that you do. But there's also the negatives where you have like grounding or like, this the idea of things that consequences that can be occurred when you don't do what is being asked of you or what fulfilling your interest. The market has the same thing. Maybe currently we see tax credits for doing, economically, environmentally sound kind of practices. You get tax incentives from the government. Or you could have like taxes that are negative consequences of your actions. For instance, you could be charged excise tax for things, or you can be charged higher gasoline prices for not carpooling, or of course you can be charged fines. Really, Adam Smith was driven on this positive incentive idea that is the better driver in the market for people to fulfill their self-interest, something that incentivizes them to do something rather than forces their hand a different direction. Competition is also really important. You really want to seek multiple avenues or have choice within the market, and having choice allows basically the consumer to keep the firms regulated themselves, because firms are going to want to make money. And you can't do that if you're competing with somebody else who is making a better product at a cheaper price. So firms are going to be driven by competition to appeal to the consumers. And so when the self-interest is involved, they're already driven to compete and to do better because they want to do better than the other person. Competition, according to Adam Smith, is a positive incentive and driver to force firms to continue to appeal to the consumer and always keep the consumer in mind, to not kind of lose the money that they could if they don't do what the consumer wants. So really, in free markets, competition and incentive is the only thing that you really need. The advantages of a free market are numerous. You have, of course, ideal market conditions. And of course, this is ideal conditions. And they're going to, in those perfect conditions, fulfill the goals of, economic freedom. You're going to have economic growth because of that incentive to compete. And you're going to, of course, have consumers, which is you and me, buying in the market, really having the power. Remember, in government, we define sovereignty as power. So when the consumer has power, then the firms are always going to kind of regulate themselves to appeal to consumers and make the decisions on behalf of consumers that are always going to be in their best interest. So even though there's so many advantages that we look at it for the free market, really today we cannot really define any country that exists today under a completely unregulated free market. So when we look at further videos, we're going to look at different kinds of markets that exist that do have an ounce of regulation and an essence of regulation, because really there's been things that have arisen within the history of free markets and capitalism that have kind of basically looked at it that incentive and self-interest don't always drive the market completely in a self-regulation way, that some intervention is necessary. In a completely free market, to have that definition, you need to have zero regulation or interference. And it completely is going to be left alone. And that's hard to do with so many different avenues that need to be taken care of and interests that need to be fulfilled. So I want